This is The Art of Startup War, and I am your sensei, Brian McMahon. Now, in Season 1 and 2, I got inside the minds of startup investors. In Season 3, I brought in entrepreneurs to share their startup journey. Here, in Season 4, we combine both, so you can hear investors critique the investment value proposition of individual companies. You're going to hear how investors make decisions to invest in startups, what makes a great entrepreneur, and how billion-dollar companies are built. So tune in every Tuesday, 10 a.m. on all the major platforms. You can empower your tribe by sharing the podcast, and remember to subscribe, rate, review, and leave us a comment. Good morning, it's Brian. We're back. It is another podcast. This time, I'm going to put my name on the line here, and I am going to say that this podcast is with an individual who has created an innovation in the healthcare space, which I truly believe will be the biggest singular innovation in healthcare in the next 10 years. Now, this is a bold statement, but it's a bold statement because I have information that backs it up. So over the next 45 minutes, we are going to talk not about improving healthcare, not about innovating, and not even really about disrupting healthcare, but we're going to talk about rebuilding healthcare the way it should be built. Dr. Voros, welcome.
Well, Brian, thank you for having me.
How is that, by the way? Was that okay?
It was great. Very nice. Very nice.
Are you feeling it?
I am feeling it.
I want to put this into context because, and not just because I'm getting old and cranky, but I always believed that creation meant we can create and we can innovate and we can make better in every single industry sector or space. And the two sectors and spaces which have really disappointed me over the last 30 years have been banking, or money, let's just call it money, and healthcare. Because money is just a really old-fashioned, traditional, broken device that has never changed. And folks can say cryptocurrency have disrupted it, and they would be true. But 5 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? Healthcare, we don't even have crypto. I was at the health conference in Vegas a couple of weeks back, and I looked at all of the speakers and what everybody spoke about, and I could not point to many areas where we could say there has been a significant breakthrough in how we care for people today versus 10, 15 years ago. Am I being too pessimistic here?
I think you're being realistic. That's exactly how I see it.
So you are an esteemed cardiologist. You have been a specialist for many, many years, absolutely renowned and well-respected within your space. You have now decided that you're going to change that. Why is this? Why have you decided to do something special in this space, considering that as somebody of your level, you could live the rest of your life extremely comfortably? Like, you never have to innovate. You don't have to go through the startup life. You don't have to do this.
No, I mean, listen, I think to a large extent it grew out of frustration. As you know, I had a very interesting opportunity a number of years ago to build a really intriguing and very forward-looking cardiovascular prevention program at the Piedmont Heart Institute. And this was back in the early 2000s when we started to use really innovative technologies such as advanced imaging and advanced blood testing, including the early ways of genetic and genomic testing, to really identify cardiovascular risk early, intervene on a very individual level, and completely change how people's outcomes occur over the following several years.
So just to take one of those words, which is genomics that you've just mentioned there, can you explain to our listeners, in as simple a way as possible, what that actually means and why it's such an important impact on our health?
It is absolutely critical. So genomics or genetics really refers to the inheritance. When we
what our mommies and daddies gave us
we
as far as our DNA,
we
right?
get our DNA from mom and dad. We get a combination of their traits, and we have about 25,000 genes in a human genome. You and I, each of us, have about 25,000 genes, and it's that genetic code that really determines who we are. That includes what we look like. Do we have brown hair? Do we have dark hair? Do we have black hair? Are we tall or are we short? But also, are we going to have heart disease or not? Are we going to develop diabetes or not? Are we going to develop cancer?
And he can tell us all this. So is this the kind of information people are able to get when they go to 23andMe?
It is the kind of information that people get when they go to 23andMe. They do look at the genetic information in a person, but there's different levels of looking at the information. And so 23andMe has a technology which is really good at looking across the genome and looking at signals that have been very well characterized.
So more general and that give a wider view as opposed to something that's very specific.
That's right, and I would say it's a little more superficial way of looking at it, or to be a little more specific, they look at a few 100,000 markers across the genome, but you and I, we have 3 billion with the B letters in our genetic code, and so if you really want to get into the details, it's critical that we look at all 3 billion, because those are very consequential.
Wow, so it's almost like a roadmap of our entire future lives that we have. But why has nobody gone deeper than that more superficial look to try and build this roadmap before?
Well, remember that we're just now getting into the genomic era. It wasn't so long ago when we first were able to sequence the human genome. And sequence the human genome, that means that we were able to read one single person's genetic code, all 3 billion letters from A to Z. That was not too long ago. It only happened in the early 2000s. And it took approximately 10 years and $10 billion, 10 years and $10 billion to sequence the genome of the very first human.
Wow.
And it took, as you might imagine, 10, 15 years.
$10 billion.
$10 billion.
Crazy, right? Okay.
Absolutely. So it wasn't until just maybe 5 to 10 years ago when the technology was even mature enough to be able to do it reproducibly. You can imagine that when you have to read 3 billion letters, the accuracy has to be very, very critical.
So the timing is perfect.
The timing is not perfect.
We could never have done this before. And it's really funny because we've got to know each other, and I've got to really like you over the last time that we've been talking but I've also been more and more excited about the fact that this could be that dividing line between healthcare and new healthcare. And the image that was in my head the last time we were talking was the Black Panther movie, where I don't know if you need to have a 12-year-old. If you have a 12-year-old,
I have an 11-year-old. Come on.
You're going to see every Black Panther movie and everything else where they're in the laboratory and they're mapping out, and she's looking at Captain America or the guy with the thing in his head as to what the landscape of his body looks like, so she can use all of the calculations to save him. And it is a medicine of tomorrow versus medicine of yesterday. And by mapping the entire body, by having the technology that can allow you not to be able to actually take the information of 3 billion letters, because that's not the impossible part. The impossible part is having the ability, the capability to actually come up with something of value to do with those 3 billion letters in a very simple way that says, okay, cool, this is what your roadmap looks like. This is what you're going to have to do from year 1 to 3. This is what you're going to have to do from year 3 to 5, and so on, where the entire health of your life is proactively managed from the beginning so that you get to live longer.
Well, absolutely. And listen, here's the most important observation that I had when I was running the prevention clinic. And this was really the motivation behind starting the project we're working on right now, is that the more we looked into the genetic code and the more we looked into some of the diseases that pop up and the more we looked into how long we can actually live, we had a very significant insight. And the insight was, Brian, that when a human being is born, we're given an allowance of a number of years that we can live. It's almost like hardwired in the genetic code. That is the maximum that we can live to. But remember that number.
It's like a best before stamp.
Is the best before. It's exactly. And remember that number is somewhere between 90, 100, 120, 130. But what happens is that almost none of us ever get to live to that expectancy, because diseases such as heart disease and diabetes and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and cancer pops up in the meantime.
But they were always in our code, right?
They were always in our code, but what people this is the
Wow.
critical insight, Brian, is that that allowance of the number of years is uncoupled from having diabetes or heart disease or cancer. So if we had a way to understand everybody's susceptibility for those diseases, we had the ability to then watch out for those popping up through one's lifetime. We can catch them very early on. We can take care of them very early on. And so what happens is that these diseases literally steal away 5, 10, 15, in some cases 20 years from somebody's life expectancy. Right? Think about somebody who gets cancer at age 60, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, kills you within 6 months. Well, that person genetically was programmed to be able to live to 100, 110. And if they didn't get pancreatic cancer, they would have. So diseases like that just pop up and just steal, like I said, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from us. And the more we looked into it, the more we realized with today's technologies, it just doesn't have to be that way. Right?
Wow.
So we can actually now look at this at the level of the genetic code, like we were talking about. In fact, there are now technologies that at a few weeks of pregnancy, we can take blood from the mother and we can sequence the baby, all 3 billion letters. So at that point, we already know if they have some sort of predisposition for heart diseases or Alzheimer's. They haven't even been born yet. So you can imagine that with that kind of knowledge, we're so empowered to then do directed surveillance from day one of one's life.
And why today is every hospital on the planet not doing this? Because it would seem to be cost beneficial. No matter, even if it cost thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars at the beginning, obviously we all know the cost of it. And I'm totally ignoring the obvious here, which is the emotional cost. All of those people who are thinking, the moms who are listening and the dads who are listening are thinking, I want my child to go through this. Or actually the children who are thinking, I want my mom and dad to live longer. I'm ignoring that because it's so obvious. It's not even worth discussing. But just the financial cost. Why would entire hospitals or countries not want this to be done for their populations so that they could avoid the cost of healthcare, have healthier folks are going to live for longer, but they're going to be healthier and they're going to be more productive and they're going to be happier in the society. Am I missing something here?
No, except that the healthcare system is so broken. I mean, you started out with that concept. And again, that was a frustration that I had when I was a practicing physician, is that the incentives are misaligned. And that is, I think, one of the biggest difficulties. And that is why I decided to pursue this outside the traditional healthcare system, because we'll get there, but we will not be, I don't believe we could do the disruption from internally. It has to be
because
from
the
the
system
outside.
is broken.
The system is broken.
And what I've seen, by the way, I've been around so many wonderful people in the healthcare space. I can't think of a single person that I've interacted with myself deep in the healthcare space who does not inherently want the human race to do better. And they don't inherently want to do their part in it. But the system itself has got so many blockages through it that it wears people down after a time and it steals their hope. So after the first 5 or 10 years, you realize it's impossible to break through. And that's why what you're doing by bypassing it and then providing a simple solution where there's actually not that many frictions with the solution. Once proven, governments, hospitals, HMOs, everyone is going to want to use this because it makes everybody better.
Absolutely.
What does the roadmap look like to do this? Because this is not, many people listening to this podcast today may think, Brian, I love this. Obviously, this is a young company. It's starting off. No, it is not. This has already been proven. So I want you to talk a little bit about the roadmap of where you started and how you started, and you gave up the easy life. And I know I would never say physician's life is an easy life, but it's definitely a life that's predictable, right? You are always going to be comfortable. You're always going to be great because you have those skills in your space, and you've moved that to the unknown. So take us through that journey over the last 7 or 8 years and where you see it going over the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it started with this frustration of the misaligned incentives. And I remember, I mean, like you said, I had an incredibly comfortable setup. I was the chief science officer for the healthcare system. I was running the prevention program and really focusing on this early adoption of technologies, genetics and all, imaging and all that. So I remember Monday mornings at 7 o'clock in the morning, we would have a research meeting every week with the CEO of the healthcare system, the CFO, the COO, all the researchers, physicians. We would present our data and show that using our advanced preventive methodologies, we are now able to make people be healthier, live longer. They no longer need to use the stress testing and the heart catheterization and all the stuff. And in the research meeting between 7 and 8 o'clock, everybody says, "This is awesome. Congratulations. You guys are doing phenomenal." 8 o'clock, research meeting's done. We move her to the room next door. This is now the executive suite. Now, the same group of people, the CEO, the CFO, the CEO, same lead of physicians, will present the same data and saying, our patients are healthier. They don't need the procedures anymore. And the same people who just congratulated me 30 minutes before in the research meeting are telling me, this is awful. You mean we're not doing stress tests anymore? We're not doing heart catheterizations? This is why our revenue's going down.
Wow.
With the same people, we just had it was crazy. So I said, there's no way we can have disruption from within. So we went out, and yes, I gave up my comfortable lifestyle and the paycheck, and we said, all right, so let's go and do this in a startup setting. And I've been exposed to venture-backed diagnostic startups and other biotech startups in the past. And so kind of back to your previous point, this was around 2010, 2011, 2012, when I think it was a perfect storm. A lot of these technologies like genetics and genomics, imaging have matured to the point that we were now able to put all of them together in a very, very significant vision. And the vision was that if we were able to create the map of human biology, perfectly complete map of human biology, and I'll tell you in a second what I mean by that, then we will be able to solve this issue of how do we get rid of diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's that pop up and take away the 5, 10, 15 years that prevents us from going to our hardwired lifespan. And so we had a very ambitious vision.
Yeah, because you're trying to take the 3 billion bits of data that define what I will become.
That's right. That's right. But so we said, okay, so the only way we're going to be able to solve this is if we take a very comprehensive look. And that's even one step outside of just looking at the genetic code and the 3 billion letters. Because turns out that when you look at diseases like we talk about, the top 10, 20 diseases, the heart disease, the diabetes, turns out that the balance between health and disease is really driven by 2 big buckets of factors. And one is the inheritance, the genetic code. The other one is the environment, meaning where do we live? What do we eat? How do we exercise? How do we sleep? All those factors. And for most people, unless somebody's born with a rare genetic disease, roughly half of our life is determined by the inherited factors and half by these environmental factors.
Makes sense.
And so we said, we're just going to map it all out. And so we undertook a very ambitious project, and we collected a very large number of people from around the world, US, Canada, Europe, Australia, and did just that. we applied very sophisticated advanced imaging technologies to them. We put them through the scanners, and we have their images, and we see inside their hearts and inside their lungs and inside their livers.
And this was an extremely expensive endeavor, right? Which is
super expensive.
Which is
endeavor.
why everybody doesn't do it. But it's a one-time cost per person.
It is a one-time cost at that level, yes. So that was one piece of it. The other piece was that then we, like you said, we mapped out all 3 billion letters in all these patients,
Incredible.
A to Z. But that's not even enough, right? That's just the DNA. But just you can imagine how our genetic codes turns into traits like height or weight or hair color or cancer or diabetes. That's a very complex process.
Yeah.
That involves not only the 3 billion letters in the DNA, but proteins and small molecules. And so we've just simply...
And then also machine learning built into it all so that you can be assisted in making the right decisions going forward.
Well, that's the next. That's the second step.
Amazing.
Right? So the first one, and we call this biological big data. Everybody talks about big data. This is the ultimate biological big data. I can tell you that. So just to put in perspective for you, we collected about 22 trillion with a T data points.
Crazy.
So as you might imagine, and this is where what you're saying AI comes in, you can imagine that with 22 trillion data points, the typical statistical methods we've used in science and medicine just break down. They just don't work.
For sure.
So actually, when we started the company, we started the data collection. Then I spent 2 years going around the world trying to find people who had the scientific knowledge and experience to even analyze or approach a data set like this. Went around the world for 2 years. You know what I found? Not a single group or person or company or academic institution had ever come up with a way, because nobody had ever collected a data set like this.
And this feels so like the Matrix. It's ridiculous because we're looking at, it's too much.
It's funny, in some of my early slides, I did use the Matrix analogy.
Yeah, because it's just data coming down as...
It is.
Because now you are analyzing everything that makes our body work for us or against us. It's truly scary, actually, just the number of data points that you have.
It is. But it's...
How did you fix that? How did you find someone?
So we found people who had experience with big data approaches, but never had this kind of data set. So we put together a group of folks from around the world, and some of our folks are in UK, some are in the Boston area. And so, but the point was, we had to work with them very closely to develop even the methodologies. And then you can think about like challenges like, so if you are going to, in a single person, look at 3 billion plus data points, how do you communicate that? How do you visualize that data? Just the data visualization? Like when you go to your physician.
I mean, I don't even know where to start.
No, exactly. So,
because you just use the T number, like it's a trillion. It's
right.
not 300
Right.
or even 300,000. It's manageable.
Correct.
But once you start moving to million and billions, it's so enormous. It's almost like the key to life.
It is. So, just that's a huge aspect of it, is how do we visualize the data? How do we communicate that data? And as we're now moving from just the research component into the clinical application, that becomes a very important task. Because now, as we are building the company at the platform level, as we're already starting to develop revelationary therapies.
Like that word.
We also starting to move partially into the clinical application of this. So back where I was when I was a practicing cardiologist, now taking the 10 years of learning in all these technologies, and now we're in the initial exploratory stages of putting together a clinic on the basis of all this knowledge that will start an early infusion of this knowledge and this approach to people as early as Q1 next year.
So I want to take a a moment to dumb this down a little bit for all of us so we really understand why this is the biggest breakthrough of the next 5 to 10 years. Take the real problem. So yes, hospitals are broken. Yes, the healthcare system is broken. Yes, everybody is stuck within this system, and they wish it could be better. But everybody wants drugs to work. Really, they would like it to. They would like more drugs to come out, and they would like more drugs to come out quicker, and they would like those drugs to function well, and they would really like the world to be a better place. But inherently built within that is a fundamental problem, which is actually nobody's real fault. This is one area where it's not their fault. It has just been a sequence of events which has meant that for every new drug to come through, it takes 10 to 15 years, right? And how many drugs need to be tried for one to be successful, generally?
Depends on how you count, but here's the general rule. For a big pharma company, has to start, on average, 24 phase 1 trials, which is when it first goes into human.
Right.
24 phase 1 trials.
When it first goes to a human.
When it first goes to human.
Okay.
They have to start 24 of those for one to succeed.
Wow. And then how
And
many
23 will fail.
How many do they do before they even get to the human trials?
Oh, then there's another 20 years of academic research in cells and mice and sheep and you name it.
So you could argue it's thousands.
Absolutely.
You could argue it's thousands.
It is thousands.
To get to 24 that make it to human trials. And then of the 24, one solitary breakthrough will happen. And the cost of those thousands of trials and those 24 that make it to human trials, what are we looking at here? It has to be in the billions.
It is in the billions, Brian. So the latest estimate is that it takes $3.6 billion to take a drug to the market.
Tremendous. Look, it's just tremendous. And I'm the first person on these podcasts and everywhere else to say these people are bad, these people are good, this is my truth. But there is no bad people here. $3.6 billion to get a drug to market is so much money that you understand on many levels why drug companies are then in such a hurry to charge large prices and get their money back as quick as they can, because they have another 999 to waste their time on to bring the next drug out to the market. So am I right in saying that the holy grail is being able to destroy that entire system? So rather than having to try 1,000 maybes to get one yes, that you just go for a few?
Absolutely. So actually, I can prove it to you. Out of the $3.6 billion that we just said, is the 0.6 that pays for the drug that was successful.
Right.
And the $3 billion pays for the other 23
failures
that failed and all the thousands of experiments beforehand. And so there are two fundamental problems why this occurs. And one is that the way drug development has worked traditionally is it starts in academic labs and researchers do research for 5, 10, 15 years on one particular molecule. Then some biotech company finds it interesting and picks it up and develops it in more mice and more sheep for another 5 to 10 years. Then Big Pharma picks it up and they put it into their phase 1, 2, 3 trials. So it's 15 years before actually there's any evidence that the drug will actually work in humans.
So it's not about cost. It's just about the time to change is too long.
Things
don't happen within our lifetime because it just takes too long. So,
takes too long.
So actually what you're saying to me, which is even more interesting, the $3.6 billion is fine. It's not, you can save the money there, but actually even saving that $3 billion, that's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing is that you can get solutions within a much shorter period of time, right?
Absolutely. And again, that's the de-risking part of it. Because what we do is we start in humans. What a novel concept. We're not mouse doctors. We're people doctors,
Beautiful.
Right? So we start in humans.
Beautiful.
So
I can
that's
tell
what
you,
we did.
PETA are going to be calling us up tomorrow saying we want this guy. No more mice.
I know.
And it's so refreshing and it's so nice because now if we have problems, cardiovascular, cancer, any problems, we can start looking for solutions within 2 to 3 years. And we can start looking through solutions with a far better sifter to get those solutions to come through. And you already have proof points of this. You have already published in the New England Journal exactly on the methodology that you've been doing, and you predicted results. And I don't know if you can talk about this, but for me, it was phenomenal what you've achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the public domain. A number of years ago, one big biotech slash pharma company was developing a novel drug for cardiovascular disease. And they were in their what's called the phase 3 trial, which is the ultimate big trial when they literally have to do 20,000 patients to show that, in fact, when they use this drug, then they will actually save lives. Takes 4, 5, 6 years to get just that phase 3 trial done, $500-600 million just to get that done. And so what we said was, okay, so we're going to take a look and we're going to show the world that, in fact, there is a way to de-risk this. And you don't have to go through all these phase 3 trials unless you're very sure that the drug will work. So we did a simulation exercise, an in silico exercise, so to say.
How long did it take you to do that exercise?
And since we had already built our platform, we already had our data set, it took us 2 months of a biostatistician's time, effectively, to do the same thing that the biotech company took 4 or 5 years. We were able to predict the result in 2 months' time. And we were right on the money.
And they had already given an indication previously to the market about what they believed the results would be. And what happened was their prediction turned out to be incorrect. And I'm talking majorly incorrect. And your prediction, just based on the data set that you had, was 100% on the money.
Absolutely. So the numbers were actually striking. So we predicted and published that our calculations indicated that the drug would reduce the risk of a heart attack by 20%. This drug company had their internal calculations, and they predicted 30% reduction, and they guided Wall Street to a 30% reduction. So we published our data in December of 2016 when the study was still going on and blinded and the results were not available. And 3 months later, the pharma company and their investigators presented the data. And despite the study being highly positive and meeting all the primary endpoints, within the 15 minutes of the presentation, the pharma company lost 9-point-some billion in market cap. 7%, I think, of their market cap, because they guided the street to a 30% reduction in the events.
And the results were actually
the results
what you
were
had
only
predicted.
20%, which is exactly what we said, and our predictions were accurate to like 3-4 decimal points of the p-value.
Incredible. And this isn't the first time you've done this.
No,
You've
we've
done
done this like
multiple
4 or
other
5
times
times
before,
yes.
and every single time you've done it, you've come up with the accurate results. So everybody who's listening to this, you want this to happen. This is the time for us to look at medicine differently. It's the time for us to take all of this incredible technology that we've had over the last 5, 10, 15 years and the abilities that we have within the machines that work alongside us to actually change the world. So where do we go in the future? We know it works. We know it makes sense. We have the data. We have the capability of being able to do it. You've already raised $30 to $40 million to create the data sets that you have right now, which you did very easily. We are now going to raise more money so that we can complete the data sets. Paint us a picture of what that roadmap looks like over the next couple of years and what will be built. Because I'm telling you, I envision entire small countries whereby they have every single person in their population with an entire data set in place, and the president of that country is saying, hey guys, we got an announcement for you. Our healthcare costs are going to be 10-20% of what they used to be because we can predict many of the things that would go wrong and fix them before they happen. Oh, and by the way, just in case you're interested, you can live another 10-15 years longer. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that's the vision of a really beautiful picture. Number one, how accurate am I? And what's the roadmap to get to that?
Well, listen, Brian, that's exactly the aspiration. That's exactly what we're doing, right? So we started out, because I'm a cardiologist, right? So we started out focusing on things like cardiovascular disease and diseases that are adjacent to that, such as obesity and diabetes and things like that. And we are already disrupting that field. And so there's two things that we see as major next steps in the next few years. The first one is take the learnings we already have and push them out to people. So that is the clinical implementation of what we're doing, which is to start these clinics where we start to administer the program, the same methodologies that we've applied in the research setting. Now we're going to apply in the clinical setting, because this is not science fiction. This is just pure science. We can now take a person in clinical practice, and if you come into my office tomorrow, we can look at your 3 billion letters. That's not science fiction. There's nothing magical about it. We can take a look at all the other molecules inside your body instead of the 5 that you typically get as part of your annual physical. We can get your imaging done from head to toe, and we can look based on whatever we find in your genetic code. If we find somebody has predisposition for prostate cancer, we'll be super aggressive about imaging their prostate every 3 months. And if something
By the way, as a patient, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it just occurred to me, wouldn't I quite happily, I know that the idea is not necessarily to get people to pay to get this up front, and that's way in the future and for governments to decide, but I was just thinking about my little boy. Like, I would happily pay $8,000-$10,000 so I could have a roadmap of what his entire future I would pay it in a second, way more than anything else out there. I mean, so
Q1, we'll have it open.
Yeah, amazing. Sorry, so continue. So we already have a lot of the data. We already have 8,000 patient points that we've started with. How much are we going to raise? When are we going to raise it? And by the way, right now, I'm no longer speaking to just the general folks who are listening to this podcast. You should all be pressurizing everybody around you to embrace these types of technologies and look into them. And I'm assuming that's a given, or I'm missing something crazy here. Now I'm speaking to venture capitalists, institutional investors, PE firms, HMOs, companies that are big within the pharmaceutical space, because you guys know the impact of this. So when we talk about how much money we're going to raise now and what this money is going to be for, listen, because you have a time-limited opportunity.
Well, look, this is my dream and this is my passion, right? And so, like you said, we've raised 40 million or so to date to build a platform for this application and really to show that this approach works. And now we know what does. So now we're starting to do two things simultaneously. One, as I mentioned, is set up these clinics so that if you want to get your boy tested, we can do that. And early next year, we will be ready to roll. Same technology that we've used for the research, exact same technology. That's number one. And by the way, we're going to, obviously, it's all going to be all FDA compliant and regulatory compliant and highly scientific. The second piece is that we're doing is that with this platform, we have already identified what we call pharmaceutical assets. These are new revolutionary drugs, actual drugs that we're going to now want to start the development of. So that's kind of the immediate next step. So we're raising somewhere between 20 and 25 million to take some of these assets we've identified based on the platform and develop them in a much more efficient way than Big Pharma does.
You could become the central repository, the central laboratory for every piece of drug development in the future.
And that's what I was going to mention to you now is kind of that's the let's say over the next 2 to 3 years, that now that we have shown that this works, actually what we want to do and what we will do is we want to build the ultimate, sometimes I call the last pharma company. Because imagine if we were sitting on such comprehensive data set that not only does it include the information about cardiovascular disease and diabetes, but it's much more comprehensive than that. So let's say we had 50,000, 100,000 people, 400,000 people, and we had all their genetic information, all the other molecular information, all their imaging information. We then applied the same learnings. Then we could tackle effectively any common chronic disease that affects us, the ones that steal away the 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we can tackle, and we will, the Alzheimer's, the Parkinson's, the inflammatory diseases, the autoimmune diseases, all that. And you say, okay, how much would that cost? Actually, it would not be more than $1 billion. That's still only the third of the cost
Of one drug.
Of one drug.
Come on.
Talk about a value proposition.
Yeah. Yeah. So today, and I want to finish us on this point because it's such a tremendous point. We all have a moment in time where we can create a healthcare system that solves all of the problems that are currently faced in the existing healthcare system. It's going to be too expensive. Countries can't afford it anymore. People can't afford it anymore. We react to the diseases. It hasn't changed in 30 or 40 years. And the greater the doctors are, the more frustrated that they become that they're not given the tools to be able to fix it. And we fix it by doing a very simple thing. We map out every single person individually and then predict based on knowledge everything that could potentially happen to that person. And based on that, we create a better world. And at the beginning, there's going to be a small raise, probably $20-25 million, right? Which is going to get us through this next level. And then once we've done that, we then make this accessible to folks where they're going to be able to do it, and countries and hospitals. So can you please share details on how people can get in contact with you? Details of the company so people can just have it very clear in their minds as well. And also areas of help or assistance where folks can get involved other than just investment, which I think is a no-brainer.
So our website is g3therapeutics.com. So it's G, the letter G, the number 3, therapeutics.com.
Perfect.
Where a lot of this information is available. People can email me. I'm on the website, so I'm easy to find. And the ways to get involved is really numerous. We are always very interested in talking to patients, talking to people who are very proactive about their healthcare. And so we want to talk to them. We want to get their perspectives. We're always interested in partnerships, strategic partnerships with pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies, because I do believe that we can learn from each other. Insurance companies, I think, super important for us to engage with and start the dialogue, because one of the biggest impediments of implementing these systems will not be the science. A lot of this will be, how does this fit in with the current payer system and things like that. So we're very interested in having those conversations.
And I want to add in there thought leaders as well. There's revolution and there's evolution. I believe that we don't have to break anything for this to replace the existing system. I think we just need folks that are well respected in multiple industries to care. And if you've heard this podcast and if you believe that you have a high enough influence level whereby you can help make a difference, then you need to contact Dr. Voros. You need to be involved in helping change healthcare forever. Not just for our kids, but actually, you know what? For us too. Okay? It has been an absolute pleasure interviewing you. You are an inspiration to an entire generation. I am looking to be a part of this crusade that you've had for the last 8 years and will have for the rest of your life, I'm sure. And I have no doubt that you are going to be the one that's going to change healthcare for the better.
Thank you. It's been a tremendous journey, and I look forward to the next phase.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us. If you love the podcast, please empower your circle by sharing these stories. The Art of Startup War is brought to you by Expert Dojo. And remember, we invest in startups, $50,000 checks. Make sure you apply on our site if you are one of those great entrepreneurs looking to bring your company to the next level. As far as the Art of Startup War is concerned, we are back every single Tuesday at 10 a.m. So remember, check out the new episodes. If you want to find out what the investors think, check out season 1 or 2. But make sure you join us every single week.